Connor! Connor! Brianna isn't moving! Emma desperately yelled through the phone. You need to come now. We were just driving, and then the car, we crashed. Our lives were perfect. My wife, Brianna, was 4 months pregnant with twins, and our 4-year-old daughter, Sapphire, was doing excellent at school. My wife and her best friend, let's call her Emma, had been friends since high school and were roommates in college. Though we didn't see her often as she lived in Europe and we lived in the US. But one day, she unexpectedly came to the US to visit us. My wife was overjoyed when she surprised us, and so was I. Little did I know, the rest of the day would be the beginning of the worst days of my life. That day, I suggested that they should go out for lunch and go explore the neighborhood together. I wanted them to have some girl time together since they didn't see each other for such a long time. I enjoyed their happiness and didn't want them to be bothered. Also, this would be a great opportunity to spend some father-daughter time with Sapphire, so we agreed and both went our ways. I brought her to the park. Out of a coincidence, we bumped into one of her friends from school. Her friend's mom and I were talking when I got a phone call from Emma. Connor, she yelled through the phone. Brianna isn't moving. You need to come now. We were just driving and then the car, we crashed. I panicked and lost control, all in a split second. I jumped off the bench so quick that I thought I was going to faint. The lady next to me started to panic too. She kept asking what was wrong, but I ignored her as I could only focus on 2 things: getting Sapphire and driving to the hospital as soon as possible. Quickly after I settled Sapphire at the back seat, I jumped behind the steering wheel and started the engine. It was a 25-minute drive from the park. I tried to focus as I had to speed up with my daughter in the back. I had no idea about my wife's situation, but I could only think about the worst scenario. I couldn't think of anything else. My wife crashed. They flipped over, and now she wasn't moving. I was so scared. Was my wife dying? I kept increasing speed, ignoring traffic lights, and after only 15 minutes, I made it to the hospital. I rushed towards the ICU with Sapphire tightly held to my chest. When I got there, I left Sapphire with Emma in the waiting room. Right when I got to my wife's room, a man came out and asked, "Are you the husband?" I was angry at him for blocking my way, but I kept my cool, realizing this was the doctor in charge. "Yes, I am. Is she okay?" He first stared at the floor, then looked me in the eyes. He took a deep breath and said, "Your wife just passed away." I don't remember what happened next, but I remember I lost control. I started to realize that I lost my wife. Forever. My best friend. The love of my life. She would never come back. The last thing I remember from that day was holding my daughter as she fell asleep. The following day, Emma, who ended up with only some bruises on her body, stayed with Sapphire and me at our house. She would watch over Sapphire so I could get some sleep and process what happened. But my mental condition was getting worse and worse. A few months after my wife passed away, I started leaving Sapphire with Emma more and began drinking. The happy and careful father I once was gone. Soon, the drinking became an addiction that nobody except me knew about. One morning, I was having a terrible hangover. I had been up drinking till 3 a.m. I didn't remember that I was supposed to go and get groceries that day, but Emma left a note on the kitchen table saying she would take care of it. But she had no idea. She had no idea she left an alcoholic, depressed father alone with a 4-year-old girl. I had completely forgotten about Sapphire. I was drinking some coffee that morning when she walked out of her room. To be honest, I didn't even know where I was and I couldn't think straight. Then it happened, out of instinct. I grabbed the chair next to me and threw it at her. I was so hungover that it took me a few minutes to realize who she was before I passed out onto the floor. The next thing I remember was waking up in the hospital, not knowing where I was and what happened. When I came home from doing groceries, I found her lying on the ground, unconscious, and her father, drunk as a whip. That's all I could remember from Emma telling the police what had happened. That day, I was kicked out of my house by the police, and I found a new apartment miles away. Every single day, someone would come in to make sure I wasn't drinking, but I was. My condition became worse, and I started drinking even more than I did before. I wasn't allowed to see my daughter because they considered me to be a danger to her. But the worst part? I didn't care. I didn't care about anything or anyone. It took me around 4 years to stop drinking and find joy back in my life. My improved behavior allowed me to go back to my house again, to see my daughter again. I felt so sorry that I left her, and therefore I was more than happy to see her and let them see how I improved. But things turned out differently. When I arrived at the house, Sapphire wasn't there. Emma told me that Sapphire, who had been suffering from cystic fibrosis, had passed away. What? No way. My little girl? I would never forgive myself. I abandoned her, left her without a caring father while she suffered. The only thought that ran through my mind was that I failed at life. My daughter suffered from a disease that is known as cystic fibrosis. Emma told me everything, and I started to feel unbearable pain in my chest. My little girl went through persistent lung infections, and her ability to breathe became worse and worse. She wasn't able to go to school and had to spend most of her time at home, if not the hospital. How could I have been so selfish? How could I leave my daughter suffering with no father around? In those 4 years, I never heard a single word from anyone, but to be honest, I can understand why no one wanted to speak to me. But here I am today. Emma moved back to Europe, and I found a new job of fostering children. I have experienced immense grief and guilt from what happened, but through all of it, I have managed to slowly recover and find a purpose in life. Of course, since my criminal record showed that I had hit my kid with a chair, I wasn't trusted and people were very suspicious, but I worked hard and showed people how I changed for the better. What helped me the most was talking about what happened. I talked to people a lot about everything, like what I have been through, my deep depression, and how I lost my child and the love of my life. Being around all of the foster children fills the cavities in my heart from what was stolen from me. There's a specific little girl whom I have a good relationship with, as if she were my daughter. Although it's too late, I know that I'm now committed to never drink again. My purpose in life is to always help and be there for these foster children. And I just hope that no one will ever have to experience the tragedies that I did.